The synoptics have the what they call the ministry. I'm not sure the texts themselves really refer to it as a ministry. That's the Latter-day references over a 1-year period, more or less, whereas the Gospel of John is a 3-year period. And, the discrepancies between the synoptics and the Gospel of John, are irreconcilable. One tends to defeat the other in terms of the narrative. So again, not in terms of the spiritual message. No one's gainsaying that, as I try to tell you. The spiritual message, insofar as it's free of unnecessary incitement, hatred, and other issues of that kind, and we've stressed that enough, I think, in this class. John is particularly guilty of that kind of activity. And in the light of the Holocaust that we've been stressing too, such issues need to be raised because the hatred and vengeance and bloodlust that was embodied in activity, whether considered to be non-Christian or Christian, in a Christian environment and world, have to be explained. And nobody wants that on their conscience anymore. So if people don't come to grips with this, then I think they're derelict in their duty, as I've tried to explain. So that's my apology for pointing those materials out. Whether anyone can or will do anything about them is another question. So no one's questioned the spiritual ideals and inspiration and attractiveness of the material that the Savior character is presented as representing and advocating. So I don't think we have any issues on that regard. What we're looking for always is the history. So this is the historical Jesus. This is not a theology class. So if there's a contradiction between the Gospel of John and the synoptics on the way the ministry is presented, if we can call it a ministry, well, we're in serious trouble right there. Because if you have two witnesses, both of which contradict the other, and almost neither of which agree except in minor portions, then which one is the one to follow? And you say, oh, well, I'm going to just conflate them both and follow them both. Well, that doesn't necessarily work always. In fact, it doesn't work on the ministry issue and a lot of other things. In fact, one, by the same token, can cancel out the other, which is what I found in the birth narratives. There are two versions of the birth narrative. Which one, two versions of the dating, which is the accurate one? Well, what it always comes down to is the people writing these documents don't seem to know a lot about what they're writing about. And then they include a lot of filler. They play off each other and have women with alabaster jars or precious ointment or what's the name of that precious ointment that we mentioned last time? Nard, what is it? Spikenard, which I've never even seen, but it's a particularly precious ointment of some kind. They have these people appearing in all different contexts, and basically one contradicting the other, but playing off the other. So same goes for the multiplication of loaves and fishes and things like that. So we're looking for the historical material, and let's continue looking. So I think we're going to deal now with the last hours, if not days, of Jesus. So we're for sure we cover that, which is very important in people's minds. And so we'll just try to follow the harmony now, and I won't follow any particular gospel. I'll see what I can come to notice here. Let's see, I'm not going to look at the Greek unless I have to. I think we can move over I think perhaps we can move over to Matthew 22 or the end of Matthew 21. I can't do all of these. It just is hard to. I guess one should go back really to Matthew 21 and entry into Jerusalem and what's called the final week, if you want to call it that. The Passion Week. Anyone have a Kleenex I can borrow? Suddenly I've found myself in an embarrassing situation. And thank you, my friend. This is enough to gain you entrance into the course and into the heavenly abodes for as long as you wish. Huh? My kingdom for a Kleenex. I'm robbing you of the two here. Because we don't know what it's going to end up needing. See, let's see. I keep going back and back and back and back here. Where should we begin? We have the blind men near Jericho in Matthew 20. I mean, you can go, I'd love to go through every part of this, but we have to try to. Where was the toilet bowl matter? That was kind of way back. Well, we'll just have to leave that, because we did that parable after he was visited the Canaanite woman and the dogs under the table material in that, and then the Pharisees as blind guides and hypocrites and so on and so forth. We've covered all that. By the way, here in Luke 19, 1 to 10, just as a parallel to Matthew 20 material, following Matthew 20, 29 to 34. Look, notice there are blind men again there in the Matthew 20, 29 material. So in the Luke 19, 1, 10, we have him entering a house of a man called Zacchaeus, or rather, he was. The man called Zacchaeus, I think, wanted to see him or wanted him to enter his house. Now, that character reappears in the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions. And in fact, that character lives in, according to the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, he lives in not Jericho, he lives in Caesarea. Caesarea is the coastal town. And after James sends Peter out from Jericho, see there's the Jericho thing in the Pseudo-Clementine's recognitions, James and the community have gone outside of Jericho. It's in the first book and second book of the recognitions, if you want to look at it. Have gone outside of Jericho, where they fled after the attack on James in the temple by the enemy Paul. And after James was thrown down the steps of the temple by the enemy Paul, and he was assaulted by a faggot or a stick from the wood piles in the temple, of wood piles there to do what? To stoke the fires for the sacrifice servers. So he led a riot of burning and violence in the temple. Acts has Paul leading the riots also, so this is not totally unconnected to Acts. After that moment, Paul, the enemy of the church, leaves off this destructive behavior and thinks that James is dead, and they leave the temple. But James's supporters find him and carry him out of the temple at night to his house in Jerusalem, James's house in Jerusalem. That will be important. All this, to some extent, has parallels, as we've said, in Acts in the Stephen episode, where Paul is involved supposedly in the attack on Stephen, and Stephen is stoned exactly like James. The Stephen episode being a compression, a conflation of these materials in Acts of the attack on James and the death of James are conflated into this Stephen episode in Acts. But you can read about that in both of my books. I don't have time to explain that to you, but you can see the elements of these things are in the Stephen attack. In any event, forget which is right, which is wrong, which is historical, which isn't historical. According to the account in the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, which is a very surprising account, particularly now that we found the Dead Sea Scrolls near Jericho, James spends the night in Jerusalem, and his followers, numbering 5,000 as usual, the number of Essenes, the number of people Jesus feeds in the Gospels, and so on and so forth, go down to Jericho en masse, which is something you don't find in the Gospels or in the book of Acts. Go down to Jericho en masse, and then because the enemy, it's not named, but it's clearly Paul, because he gets letters from the high priest to pursue the early Christian community to Damascus. So it's clearly supposed to be the same character that Acts is calling Paul. They just call him the man who was our enemy. And Paul admits, as you know, to persecuting the church even unto death at this period, so it's not too out of touch with that. It's just more detailed than what we get in Acts, which is probably, being a Pauline book, anxious to, if this is accurate, and we don't say it is, I'm just giving it to you, you're the judge, you're the jury. If this is accurate, Acts would be at pains to either fob it over, cover it up, rub it out, do something to lessen the terrible implications of it. But they carry James down to Jericho, and it turns out, as the chapter continues, he has a broken leg, or one or both his legs have been broken. Now that kind of accurate detail, the flight to Jericho, the one or both legs being broken, that seems, by the way, incorporated into the Jesus death scenario, where the soldiers go along and they say, break his legs so that he'll die on the cross, because the Jews don't want to leave people up on the cross past nightfall. So they broke his legs or someone. There's a correspondence in those themes one should look at. I don't have time to go into the exact meaning of the correspondence at this moment, just pointing it out to you. In any event, James broke one or both his legs. And we know that because they go outside of Jericho because the enemy is pursuing them through Jericho and then going on to Damascus. And he misses them because they've gone out somewhere outside of Jericho to visit the tombs, as I've told you, of two of the brothers who were remembered before God. There's that remembered before God, the usage we've been talking about in this class. And that miraculously whitened of themselves every year. And so they're paying a pilgrimage. So that site looks very much like where we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, you see, those people could not have imagined the importance of such a site prior to our having found these Dead Sea Scrolls, which is what I consider to be good indication of a kind of authenticity to this material that is often lacking elsewhere. I mean, that is extremely impressive. If that is Qumran, as we call the area of the scrolls type area, then that they went out to Qumran, or an area like Qumran, and the enemy, the man who was their enemy, missed them. That's really that to me satisfies the criteria of uniqueness, when something is so unique and surprising that you wouldn't have expected it. Where authenticity and historicity goes. It's not a proof positive, but it certainly is something adds a good deal of weight. Well, the reason I'm talking all this is that at the end of about a month there, James sends Peter out. James is the clear leader of the early church, which Acts has really not been anxious to reveal that, and it doesn't reveal that till about chapter 15. Paul makes it very clear in Galatians, and there's no doubt in it that James is the leader of the early church, not Peter. Now I know a believing person saying this is incredible to them. How come we've been told Peter is the leader of the early church from the time we were little children, and that Peter is the rock of the church, and Rome and so on is built on St. Peter's bones, and so on and so forth, that James was the leader of the early church? I don't have to answer that question. You have to answer that question. I don't have an answer for such a question, because the facts don't bear that out. And all Eastern manuscripts make it clear that James is the bishop of bishops. Peter is only an apostle, not the bishop of bishops. The bishop of bishops is the overseer leader of the early church. I can't help it. That's just the way it is. Now, I've had the honor of pointing this out on a worldwide basis. Before my work, very few people either were willing, or there was a school in Germany that for a while was emphasizing things like this in the 19th century. But I didn't get onto it until the Dead Sea Scrolls began to point me in that direction. And so I didn't take my inspiration from them. But fortunately, I've had the privilege of pointing this out, and it's become very widespread point of interest. That's all I can say. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. So you guys, and we did all that work here at Cal State Long Beach. So if anyone say, what do you do at Cal State Long Beach? We say, well, we do really important work here. More important work. Tell me what you've done at Harvard lately. Tell me what you've done at Notre Dame lately. Oh, well, I translated paragraph 2 of the Testament of Adam. Whoa, that's really very interesting what you did. But it really isn't anything earth-shattering or world-shattering. So if anyone tries to put down where you guys are, just spit that back to them, okay? And see if they can come up with anything more significant than what people have been doing here. Okay, so this so James sends out Peter from Jericho, no, from outside of Jericho, probably I would say Qumran, to Caesarea, and there he stays at the house of Zacchaeus, a Christian or a quasi-Christian or whatever this group should call itself in Caesarea, and Zacchaeus asks after James's health, and Peter says that he's still limping on one leg from the injury he took a month before from being thrown down the temple steps by the enemy Paul. Now, you see, that's really what I would call down-to-earth dialogue. Now, see, to my mind, this is transformed in Luke into this silly episode here, when there's a little man called Zacchaeus, a tax collector and rich. And he couldn't see because he was little. I don't know how this plays off the others. It's in the wrong place. It's in Jericho. And, you know, Paul is not leaving Jericho. Jesus is coming to Jericho. Paul is leaving Jericho, and the pseudo companies here, Jesus is coming to Jericho. This is how I would work on these episodes. And Jesus, he wants Jesus to come into his house. And he climbs up a tree, right? Well, you know, you judge which kind of material seems to you to be more historically authentic. The little man climbs up a tree and says that he's a sinner. And then he's going to give to the poor, of course, because he has wrongly reacted. Anyway, I don't credit this at all. I mean, this is just we're picking up the themes and juggling the themes we've been seeing again. And I think totally another filler bit of material. Again, you say, President Eisenman, you're really harsh. Yes, well, if you think this can be credible, a little man shimming up a tree who's a tax collector and then gives half of his taxes to the poor. So it's the same theme we've been watching, the pro-Roman presentation and the tax collectors going into the kingdom of heaven before the Jews and things like that, and the tax collectors believing on John. And here the tax collector wants Jesus to come into his house. We've had around 15 of those episodes. The Roman centurion wants Jesus to come into his house. The Roman centurion wants Peter to come to his house in Acts and so on. We've got innumerable of those episodes. They multiply. Are they historical? I can't tell. You have to be the judge. Okay, so now we have John 11, and in my sequence here, 55, which was the anointing of Jesus by Mary and I guess Martha complaining or whatever, and then again giving to the poor. That's again the giving to the poor episode in John. And then we come on to the Matthew 21. Let me see, in John 12, we have 9, just to end it in my harmony here. The common people learn. I don't know if this translation is good because I don't have the Greek next to it in the harmony. Yeah, this is the Lazarus thing that we talked about before. We have to put Lazarus to death because the common people are believing on Jesus because of Lazarus, which is totally confused. Okay, the entry into Jerusalem. All four have it. Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19. John 12. We're on the same page now together here? Okay? Entry into Jerusalem, or whatever your harmony calls it. Jesus sends 2 disciples ahead of him, and they get an ass tied next to, with a colt, tied next to a tree. John, I don't think, has the ass and the tree material at that point. Does John pick up the ass and the tree material? I don't see it. John rather has a great multitude yelling out, Hosanna to the King of Israel. Oh, no, he does have it. And Jesus found a young ass sat there on. line 14. Is that correct? Okay, so it doesn't have sending the disciples to find the ass. The sending the two disciples is very much like sending the two disciples to ask John when he's going to get moving, things like that. Again, I can't judge the historicity. You'll be the judge of that. But let's just pick up the thread here. For Matthew, this is supposed to fulfill the scripture, Zechariah 9:9. Tell the daughters of Zion that your king is coming, meek and riding on an ass upon the colt of the foal of an ass. So there may be an attempt to incorporate scriptural proof texts into this narrative, but again, I can't judge the historicity part of it. So, but they put their garments out, and the multitude spread the garments in the way. Oh, that goes back to the Noctimon material, where Noctimon was so rich that the poor laid out their garments before him as he made his way to the temple in the Talmudic material. So the laying out the garments, the laying out the body of Lazarus, have to go through all these laying down their garments, laying down the body, whole series of additional usages. And others, I think that goes right to the Talmudic material that I mentioned about Noctimon, that we've had a lot about now, and his riches and so on. But in any case, this may not be that way. And Mark has, they cast on him their garments. Mark has the casting language there, and Luke goes back to the spreading language. I don't see anything in John about that aspect of things. Then in Luke adds some of the Pharisees from the many, from the multitude, the many being the rank and file of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Master, he cries out, some of the Pharisees, rebuke your disciples. Jesus pictures, he uses this to have the enemies cast up a bank about thee, and compass round and keep thee on every side, and dash thee to the ground, and your children with them. I wouldn't want to meet this Jesus character in this move. He's basically picturing their children having their teeth being knocked out and horrible things of that kind, which the average believer just passes over. That's okay. It's not happening to me. Not happening to my group of people. But if that were aimed at your group of people, you'd be a little bit stunned by it. I don't blame Jesus for this. I don't take any of this kind of speaking as historical. But that's your decision. We know the other side is written right here. But the main thing is, they shall not leave one stone upon the other. That most scholars, now you can beat me over the head or do whatever you want, that most scholars admit is written after the fall of the temple, when the Romans tore down the temple stone by stone, because they saw it as the seat of Jewish revolutionary and messianic strife in Palestine. And they say, and here it's put as a prophecy or a visionary, 30 to 40 years before the event, the scholars, most I don't mean any harm to fundamentalist-minded people, but non-fundamentalistically minded scholars will admit that that is a pure indication of it having been written later, retrospectively put into Jesus' mouth. Now, if you feel this isn't that way, you're certainly entitled to that. If you believe this is his view of then he's clairvoyant to perfect prediction. Anyway, either one or the other is true. You're the decision on that. But that, you see, does not come in Matthew and Mark, I think, until later. When Jesus is leaving the temple and then he curses it or something, and then he says there shall not be one stone standing upon the other. When he's leaving Jerusalem at some point after having been in it, we should come to it. Are you following me? Everyone okay so far? Okay, I'm sorry not to have a lot of discussion about all these things, but if we discuss everything, we'll never get through the material. So you know, take it or leave it, do with it what you will, you're the final judge. Okay. So he come to Jerusalem, the multitude said, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee," says Matthew 21:10. Mark doesn't say anything about that, just that he came there, but he spent the evenings in Bethany with the 12. Bethany is sort of behind the Mount of Olives, overlooking Jerusalem. I've lived there for a year. I know where it is. You can see the temple from there and the way Jerusalem is constructed. Weren't Mary and Martha from Bethany? And wasn't Simon the leper? Okay, so we've had, you know, we can trace the Bethany references in different Gospels. That doesn't mean you should conflate them all into a single picture. That means you should look at what the issues are separating them all. I mean, the one who wants to make this all work will conflate them all. The person who wants to evaluate historically will compare them. A different thing. Anyway, again, I think this is the prophet, Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee. That's a little bit like saying in John, "And this was the first of the signs he did in Cana of Galilee." Now, Cana of Galilee I took to be symbolic. Cana, Canaanians, Zealots, Galilee, Galileans, also another name in early Christianity for Zealot. Why was Galilean a name for Zealot as well? Because of someone called Judas the Galilean, which is why Judas, by the way, as a name is so important throughout these materials too. It often represents an attack on Judas Iscariot being perhaps an attack on Judas the Galilean and his ideology of resistance to Rome and resistance to paying the taxes. Judas the Galilean appeared when? At the time of the census in 7 AD, the time Jesus is supposed to have been born in the Gospel of Luke, when he told the people not to pay the census, not to pay the tax, and started a movement that Josephus describes. Now, at that point in the Jewish War and the Antiquities, the two books that Josephus writes, Josephus uses that to launch into a description of the 3 or 4 Jewish so-called sects or schools of thought. Now that is significant because in Luke, that is the birth moment of the Messiah too. In addition, if you look at Josephus, that's when he starts talking about the different sects of the people. So in Josephus' mind, the appearance of Judas the Galilean triggers the division into the sects. You say, "Oh, I don't know anything about Judas the Galilean." Well, read Josephus and you'll know more about him. He particularly is described in the Antiquities, but he also appears in the war. And the thing about Judas the Galilean, weirdly enough, is that his death is not described. Now we get the death in a previous revolutionary episode in the war of a person called Judas of Sepphoris, the person who broke into the armory at Sepphoris and was blamed for a lot of the unrest in 4 BC when Herod died and the people tried to pull the temple eagle down that he had constructed over the gate of the temple. And Judas Sepphoris being a town in Galilee, looks a lot like Judas the Galilean. And most of those people, as you recall, Herod burnt alive. The people who were involved in the temple eagle incident. All those things are interesting. I don't know what to find it make. Anyway, this is the prophet. That looks like the true prophet ideology again of the Ebionites, the Jewish Christians, which you'll find very well laid out in exceeding detail in the Pseudo-Clementine literature again. That's all I can say about that. Okay, so Matthew 21, Mark 11. So they do have him in Bethany, Mark does anyway. And in the morning he returned to the city, and in Matthew he sees a fig tree, and he curses the fig tree for some reason. I don't know why he curses the fig tree, and that's the fig tree is a symbol of the state of Israel or Judea, as often some of these trees are taken to be. You know, in the Roman Judaic capta coins, which I've showed you, they're in my book anyway, you can look at them. The Roman Judaic capta coins, the weeping female figure symbolizing the beaten state of Judea, the Jews, with Vespasian's picture on the other side, the general who destroyed the temple, and the Palestinian entity is weeping under a fig tree. Now, or a, yeah, I guess she's weeping under a palm fig tree, yeah. Well, that was used there to symbolize the Jewish state. Whether that has anything to do with this, you'll have to decide. Matthew 21, and Jesus entered the temple and cast all of them out who bought and sold in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money table changers, and calls out, quoting Isaiah 56, "My house shall be called a house of prayer and not a den of robbers." Now, it's basically the same in Mark. Luke compresses it a bit, but Mark adds something, doesn't he? And line 17, you see the addition there? And he taught and said unto them, it is not written, no, pardon me, line 16. And he would not suffer any man should carry a vessel through the temple. And he would not suffer any man to carry a vessel through the temple. In other words, how many days is he up there teaching? I don't know if I have it right, can pull it out. Is it 2 or 3 days? I don't remember how many days he's there before he leaves. Anyway, the point is that he has control of the temple at this point. He's pictured as having control of the temple at this point, and he is so powerful that he can interrupt commerce in the temple. So his band, whoever is with him, his followers, have taken over the temple. If you follow Mark, I mean, it's not in John, and John places the whole episode when anyway, at the beginning of his ministry 3 years before. It's in John 2. It's right at the beginning. So that's a problem between the two episodes, unless there were 2 takeovers of the temple, which is probably not probably very believable. Now, he couldn't do this except in the miracle-minded people without a powerful force, is what most commentators think. And most commentators call this Jesus' attack on the temple and consider this the reason for his arrest. And that's how it's presented in the Synoptics. Obviously, if someone did this in the temple, the authorities would deal with him afterwards. Roman and Jewish, whichever, together, however. You can't have people, it's like this North Vietnamese taking over Hue. If you remember the Vietnam War, the Americans are not going to let them take over the holy city of Hue. And they marched down there with Marine battalions and cleaned that place out, like, completely. That was the Tet Offensive, if you recall. You don't take over these things in the real world. This is very charming, but you know this is not very historically precise, put it that way. There's much more going on. If this is accurate, I don't know if it is. That's you have to judge. If you know anything about merchants and people of that kind, and particularly in the Middle East, but almost anywhere, if you go up and turn over their money tables, I had this problem in India when I was there. I didn't pay someone for his soft drink, what he wanted. The guy almost had me pursued by mobs of people through the market. Once I was in Italy, and they were charging me for my coffee 3 times what I was supposed to be charged, and I got up and just put down what it was supposed to be and walked around, and the man ran after me for almost 2 miles. You know, when I was on a bicycle and he's grabbing the handlebars of my bicycle, you know, you can't deal with merchants like this. You never meet a merchant who lets you get out of his shop without paying or getting violent as a result of it. It just doesn't happen. So, you know, this is either miraculous material or unrealistic or novelization or romanticization, however you want to put it, or miraculous, as we just said, and that's how most people take it. But this would cause huge consternation, this kind of thing. I often used to compare it in my younger days here to going down to San Diego Wild Animal Park and going into the tourist center there and overturning all the tables there with the stuffed animals and the cash registers and saying, you know, you shall not do commercial activities in my father's animal park. And then see what would happen to you there, you know, if you tried to do that. And that's a nice place, San Diego Wild Animal Park. You know, it's supposed to be a reserve. You can't go into the tourist shop there and overturn all the money tables. Now you're looking at me with consternation. I'm sorry. Think about it. That's all I can tell you. Decide for yourself. I'm not trying to say it did or didn't happen. That's up to you. But there's more to it if it did happen, and so on. Anyway, let's carry on here. So we're at Mark 21, and this is taken by most scholars as the trigger of the arrest. So now we have Matthew 21 here, about the fig tree, more about casting. Notice all the casting materials that you just should catalog all things about casting. Cast into a furnace of fire, casting down, casting out. I've done that in some of my work, and it's a very fruitful thing to do. And so Matthew 21 continues with the priests, the scribes, the elders coming and harassing him. And he's talking about John here. You can read that for yourself. Matthew 21:28. I'm trying to skip through to the important events here. Some more parables. But you see the Matthew 21:28 material, which is not paralleled in Mark or Luke or John, has an interesting little conclusion which we're used to by now. Verily I say unto you, the publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you. There is the typical refrain. And I've mentioned it before. For John came in the way of righteousness. That we can all agree on that John came in the way of righteousness. But the publicans and the harlots believed on him. Well, that's just nonsense. The publicans and the harlots didn't believe on John. The publicans and the harlots caused his death. The harlots are Herodias. The publican is Herod Antipas, and they're involved in his death, you know. And John was against their fornication and things like that in all contexts. So I mean that's nice sounding phrases for the believer, but I don't think it holds up to anything that happened historically, and I don't think Jesus would have said that in any case. But again, it's all for the Pauline mission. Remember in the book of Acts, as I told you, after Paul is sent down to Agrippa I's palace, Agrippa II's palace in Caesarea, under protective custody because the people in the temple want to kill him because he's introducing non-Jews into the temple. Remember all that? And it's not nice to want to kill people for introducing non-Jews into the temple. I mightily agree with you, but those were the rules in the Middle East at that time for holy places. And where do those rules still function? In Mecca today. You can't go into Mecca at all as a non-Muslim. You'll be killed. Today, for PR reasons, they might escort you out kindly, but if you want to read what the situation was like in the last century, read Charles Doughty, Travels in Deserta Arabia, when he sneaks into Mecca, or he tries to, or he doesn't even, he's bypassing it and they want to kill him. He's the inspiration for Lawrence of Arabia. He's a British poet. It's a great book. T.E. Lawrence took all his inspiration from this book. It could be Arabia Deserta, or it's really this way. It travels in Arabia Deserta, deserted Arabia. And you want to see what Mecca was like up until the oil companies came in, and even now you can't go to Mecca on pain of death, or the whole precincts are forbidden. Same for Medina. Some of you are looking at me surprised. No, no, you can't enter Medina or Mecca as a non-Muslim on pain of death. That's the way it is. And this is 19 centuries later, so yeah. They might just escort you out, but if the mob heard you were there, if you were in one of the tents and they discovered you were a non-Muslim or something like that, the shrieks might go up and people would probably try to kill you. Yeah, the mob and the pilgrimage would try to kill you, even today. Any case, so this problem, as we've talked about, of being barred from the temple and so on and so forth, I mean, that may not be a nice thing, but that's to some extent the way it was. So Paul is mobbed in the temple for bringing non-Jews in. That's in Acts 20, 21, 22. And then he's makes some speeches to the crowd supported by the Roman troops. And then they take him down to Caesarea under Roman guard, because the mob, not because they're arresting him, but because they're protecting him as a Roman citizen. And he ends up in Agrippa I's palace, Agrippa II's palace in Caesarea, and he has very intimate talks for 4 chapters, the longest section of the book of Acts, from around Acts 24 to Acts 28, something like that. I don't have it in front of me, both with Agrippa II and his quasi-mistress Berenice, whom I've told you about several times now in this class, and her sister, who's not identified as her sister in Acts, Drusilla, and Felix. And those are the prostitutes and the tax collectors, because the mob looked upon those women as no better than prostitutes because of all the fornicating and change of husbands and things. So those are the code words here. You say, how do you know that, Professor Eisenman? Well, maybe I'm wrong. You be the judge. The publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of heaven. That's supporting Paul in Acts, in my view. Anyway, you have to know Acts and the history of Palestine, and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, what do the Dead Sea Scrolls think about fornication? Barred. Totally barred. Barred to the extent that niece marriage is considered fornication, which the Herodians are doing everywhere, marrying their close cousins and nieces. Barred to the extent that divorce is forbidden. Barred to the extent that the ruler can have only one wife, and one wife only during the whole term of his life, and he cannot put her away. And that's in the temple scroll, and she must be Jewish. All those are, to me, the other side of the coin, aimed against this kind of document, aimed against the Herodian family, aimed against the kinds of things that are being permitted here. They say, I'm on this side. Okay, fine, I'm not saying you're wrong, but let's get it right. Did the Messiah of Palestine, the popular leader greeted as Hosanna, the son of David, teach these things, or more like the scroll things? Well, to my view, it would be more like the scroll things. But again, we don't have to keep on repeating that. Okay, so here is another parable. They planted a vineyard and a hedge about it, digged wine, and so on and so forth. And most of the parables are pretty clear. The husbandman, line 38, saw the son among themselves. They said, this is the heir, come let us kill him. That's supposed to be Jesus. And they took him and cast him forth out of the vineyard and killed him. That's again the Jews killing Jesus. When therefore the Lord of the vineyard shall come, what will you do to the husbandman? And he said unto them, he will miserably destroy those miserable men, and he will let out the vineyard to other husbandmen. Paul's new Gentile Christian community. I don't have to do much to penetrate the parables. They're all almost always of the same tenor. They're all pro-Pauline, basically, anti-Jew, Palestinian Jewry. Again, you say I'm very harsh, but you look at them and you see if you have difficulty figuring out what's being said. They're all in favor of you, the new Christians. Fair enough. That's good if the Messiah of Palestine taught these things. What if the Messiah of Palestine taught these things? How come he was so popular? You mean all the people in Judea were anxious to pass all this material out overseas to the Roman Empire? And why did the priest say, this man is so powerful, popular, better one man die for the country and the people live? How come if he's so popular and so on, or the crowd is just a fickle bunch of fools, the way Monty Python portrays them in The Life of Brian? How many have seen The Life of Brian? Well, that's about the way the picture here is developing. The crowd is like a fickle bunch of idiots, which I don't think they were, and that's why Josephus is a better picture of them. Anyway, but you see, Jesus doesn't really show any pity for his own people. They will destroy these miserable men. And then he quotes, the stone which the builders rejected will become the cornerstone. That's from a psalm. It's always good to look at these psalms. I don't have time to do that now. Therefore, and he explains it where in Mark he doesn't, I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken away from you and given to a nation, to another nation. So it's always the same in favor of the Pauline Gentile mission, taken out and given, which is nice. I'm the new Gentile. I like that. Of course it appeals to me. Why shouldn't it? You say, you're the Jewish person. Of course it doesn't appeal to you. That's why you're gnashing your teeth, people like you, Professor Eisenman, and others. Not really. I don't mind, the Hellenistic Jesus. The only thing I mind is the problem of the incitement that has occurred and the pejoration that goes along with that. I mean, there's no pejoration, as I've said, of Eskimos, of Bushmen, or the Kalahari, people with their bows and arrows. There's only pejoration of one people, and that's what I think it makes it so difficult, why the problem has become so intractable over the centuries. Okay, so they laid hold on him, you see, but they want to capture him, but what happens? They fear the multitudes. So you see a popular leader among the multitudes. So again, you have to, who took him for a prophet, the true prophet. More parables. Line 7 of Matthew 22. But the king was wroth and sent his armies and destroyed the murderers. The Roman emperor, you see, is going to send his armies and destroy everybody. And these are favorite sayings. In any event, I don't think the Roman emperor and his armies were looked upon as positively as this in Palestine, not from what I get from the other writings, and therefore I think it's Greco-Roman people writing this, people who support the Roman Empire and its Pax Romanum and things like that. You say, well, the Messiah may have been like this, and that's why he was treated like that. That's possible. I don't think that explains his popularity. And anyway, I don't think he would have been as vicious as this in terms of his the speeches he makes. The end of that parable, line 13, Matthew 13, then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, cast him out in the outer darkness, and there shall be much weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. More casting out language, and that's a favorite passage. Many are called, few are chosen. There's no wonder a lot of this is very, very attractive, because the sayings incorporated are very beguiling. Again, I would note that the fact that the armies are going to come and take vengeance and so on and so forth is certainly, most would say, written after the fall of the temple. But you say, though, that's part of the prophecy. Now here we have some questions by the Jewish leaders. I got to move along here, and I'm not going to get where I wanted to get to the little apocalypse and the woes against the scribes and the Pharisees, but I'll just keep going. We'll do our best. We'll do our best. Try to get through this material from my warped perspective. So in Matthew, they want to ensnare him. It's the Pharisees in Matthew, the Herodians in Mark, the Pharisees and the Herodians in Mark. And in Luke, it's the spies who want to do this, ensnare him or trap him into bad talk. And they said to him, their disciples with the Herodians, so here the Herodians do pop up in Matthew 2. We know know that you are true, the true prophet, and teach the way of God, the way terminology in Acts being a name for early Christianity, and also an important ideology in the community rule of the Dead Sea Scrolls, preparing a way in the wilderness. And they ask him the tribute question, should we pay Caesar the tribute, which is, of course, the burning issue from the time of Judas the Galilean in 7 AD to the present here, and supposedly around 30 AD. And they brought him a penny, and this is the famous one where he says, whose picture is on it? And they look on it, and it's Caesar's picture, so he says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and unto God the things that are God. Again, very, very clever. But that can be taken several ways. Suppose you were here that you believe that nothing belonged to Caesar and everything belonged to God. Then that could be saying, don't pay any taxes. But in any case, it's normally taken as pay your taxes and so on and so forth. Again, I don't think the Jewish Messiah would advocate paying Roman taxes. But that's just me. I may be wrong. If he's a worldwide Messiah, not a Jewish Messiah, well, that's fair enough. Pay your Roman taxes. I wouldn't pay taxes to Nero if I could avoid it. I wouldn't pay taxes to Caligula. I wouldn't pay taxes to these depraved, disgusting, perverts. You want to pay taxes to those people? Be my guest. I don't think that was on in Palestine, popular Messianic leaders. I can't imagine it. Try to imagine that. Here we're under occupation by, we're in Mexico, we're under occupation by America. And a prophet comes and says, pay taxes to the Americans, to the Mexican people who are in a resistance mode mindset. How popular was that going to be for someone cleverly saying, these things? Maybe that's saving their skins and a good political advice, but I'm not sure it's a very popular position. Anyway, something else. And Paul issues this. Paul in Romans 13 says the same thing: pay taxes to Caesar. So again, I think we have Jesus Paul here, and Paul, is a Roman citizen. And so the Sadducees then are upset by this. And in Josephus, it's clear that this is probably taken from Josephus in the sense that Josephus makes a point that the Sadducees, his Sadducees, deny the resurrection. That's the difference between when he names the parties between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So now you're going to hate me for saying this. When they come to him and try to trip him up on the question of the resurrection, the Pharisees do believe in the resurrection. The Sadducees don't, according to Josephus, and this is always the New Testament position. The writers having read their Josephus, I believe, they make up this other thing. And that, I think, comes from the Maccabee books. There are 7 brothers in the Maccabee books. How many read the Maccabee books? What is the parable of the 7 brothers in the Maccabee books?
They wouldn't eat before.
They wouldn't eat on pain of death. They're the first martyrs. Each one dies in turn. The mother encourages each of them to die because they're going to get their soul back and be resurrected. So it is the theme of resurrection, but resurrection as a theme encouraging martyrdom for your people and for God and for the Holy Law. It's a very inspiring episode, even though most of us probably don't believe it really occurred. But still, it's meant to inspire people to martyr themselves for the law and not break the law and so on and so forth. It's in Maccabees 2 Maccabees, chapter 7. This to me plays off that. The 7 brothers, and here the nonsense question is asked. Okay, if there are 7 brothers and you believe in the resurrection and one is married, and now we're being very clever because we know if he didn't have a son, his brother's supposed to marry him. So we're playing off the Levirate marriage theme and lots of other clever things here, which I think is written to belittle these things from someone overseas, and it's not Jesus, but you decide if it's Jesus. In any case, the wife died, the second took her, so they're laughing at this Levirate marriage where the brother is supposed to raise up seed unto his brother, and making a total mockery out of that holy moment in the Maccabees 2 book, where the mother encourages each brother in turn to martyr themselves. And that, by the way, is echoed in an episode in Josephus, when the Roman armies and Vespasian are making their way down, or is it Herod? I guess it's Herod, are making their way down from Galilee, and he meets the people, the resistance fighters in caves, and they refuse to give in to him. And Josephus pictures Herod as going, or is it, I can't remember if it's Herod or if it's Vespasian. I think it's probably Vespasian. In any case, or Titus, going out and praying, begging them, give up, we don't want to kill you. And there are 7 brothers there, and the father encourages each of the brothers to jump off the cliff and turn rather than surrender to the Romans. To me, this plays off both of those episodes and belittles them. Oh, okay, you stupid Jews. You know, how about your dumb Levirate marriage idea? You're talking about resurrection and getting your soul back and being, inspired by giving your life for the law and so on, and 7 brothers. Suppose one was married to a woman and the next married, next married, next married. Who would have the wife in heaven since you believe in resurrection of the dead? That, I think, is what is behind here. I see this as a mocking episode of very holy passages in Jewish literature from this period. You probably wouldn't see it like that. But in any case, Jesus uses it to go on and to describe what the heavenly existence is like. When they rise from the dead, they do not marry or are given in marriage. That's in Mark and in Matthew and in Luke. They are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. That's how Luke puts it. That's very nice. That particular passage is very noble and so on. Everyone is a son of God. There are multitudinous sons of God because you're sons of the resurrection, sons of righteousness. I think that's authentic Palestinian doctrine, by the way, that all the sons of righteousness are the sons, all the righteous ones are the sons of God. Now, as you become perfectly righteous, which to be resurrected you probably should or would be, then you become a son of God. He then pronounces in 34 of Matthew, 28 of Mark, and not in Luke here, the 2 righteousness commandments. The first one, and John the Baptist was supposed to have taught these according to Josephus. James teaches these. The Essenes teach these according to Josephus. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the second one is loving God. Love the Lord thy God. The 2 love commandments. What does Josephus call the first love commandments? Loving the Lord thy God with all thy might? The piety commandment. That's the definition of Hesed. Hesed. Hesed, the Hasidim in Long Beach. Madonna and her Kabbalah friends who consider themselves to be Hasidim, pious ones in succession of these, are holding these things very dear, supposedly, loving God. And then loving your neighbor as yourself is the righteousness commandment. One defines your relationship to God, one defines your relationship to your fellow man. They're both in the Damascus document of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're both in the Damascus document. They're in the description of Essenes. Just look at Josephus' description of Essenes, and they're in his description of John the Baptist. So they're also what the Gospels portray Jesus as teaching here. But he adds something. On these 2 commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. Well, in the Talmud, Hillel, the famous teacher, is portrayed as saying that in the opposite way. Hillel and Shammai in the Talmud debate on this issue. And Hillel, after Psalm 1 comes and asks him, what's the meaning of the law? Hillel says, do not do unto your neighbor as you would not have done unto you, or something like that, the sort of reverse of the righteousness commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself, and so on. And then he says, on this hangs the whole law and the prophets, he says in the Talmud. So we're getting variations on a theme. I don't know what came first. That's for you to decide. I just want to show you what are the things that need to be looked at in order to discuss the historicity of these things. Okay. Now, he said there's no greater commandment than this. Notice, by the way, Paul knows the love commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Where does he use it? Romans 13. I've read it to you before, but I don't think there's any more use of the love commandment than this. And I think it's horrible, myself, to use the most precious commandment of the Jewish people at this time in this fashion. And it's why Paul was so hated in Palestine, I believe. And those who love him can love him, but the people who hated him have cause for hating him. Listen to the cynicism here in Romans 13. Let every soul put himself under the higher authorities. He means by that the Roman authorities. He's writing to the Romans. For there is no authority except from God. That is, the Romans have got victory, so they get authority from God. And the authorities as they had exist have been appointed by God. So the Romans have been appointed by God. So that he who sets himself up against the authority sets himself up against the order of God. If you resist this, then you're resisting the order of God. And they who do resist shall receive the judgment to themselves. For the rulers are not frightened, do not have no fear of good works. There he uses the works language, but they don't like evil. And are you afraid of authority? Do good, and you'll be fine. And then he uses the servant of God language there. For it is a servant of God, but to be a servant of God is good for you. But if you do evil, you should be afraid. For he who wears the sword does not do so in vain. There will wrath to him that does evil. In other words, the wearing of the sword, as we know, brings its own reward. So Paul is threatening that if you wear the sword, you're going to be paid with the sword. This is why it is needful to be under it, not because of the wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. Conscience in Paul is always a euphemism for the law, the Hebrew law. For because of this you must pay taxes. There it is. For the servants of God also, giving attention to the same thing. So even those who call themselves servants of God must pay taxes. And the wearing of the sword is its own reward, the ones who refuse to pay taxes, the zealots. Then give to all there what is due them. Taxes to whom taxes are due, custom to whom custom is due. Oh, so facile, so clever, but so objectionable if you're one of the resistance parties. Fear to whom fear is due, honor to whom honor is due. You see, you could hate this person if you were a patriot in Palestine. You don't hate him because you love him, but you could hate him as a patriot. And do not owe anything to anyone except to love one another. So, in support of paying taxes to the Roman authority, he quotes the love commandment, the commandment James calls the royal law of Scripture. Love your neighbor as yourself, for he who loves has fulfilled the whole law. Okay, so you want to show love the authorities, love the Roman authorities, and pay them their taxes. And if you do this, you're fulfilling the whole of the law. Basically, that's a little bit cynical the way I'm interpreting, but that's what he's saying in the end. So you can see that there are, I don't think anyone knows Paul. I'm not bragging here. Paul brags, but so some of us can brag. I don't think anyone knows Paul in the Jewish world better than myself. And so I don't think you'll get Jews pointing these things out to you. So don't worry about it. You'll never hear this from anyone because they don't know anything about Paul and they never read him. And I've never met anyone who does read him with any effectiveness. So this is just something we're talking about ourselves here. That I don't think I think the people at that time, not now, reading this material would be horrified. That's all I can tell you. Now I don't know what people think. But anyway, that's how Paul uses the love commandment, as you see, very cynically in support of Rome and paying taxes to Rome. I didn't see that, Professor Eisenman. Okay, maybe you didn't. Look at it more carefully and decide for yourself. Maybe he's just being a nice guy there. You'll have to decide. I think there's always more. Okay, now, so the Pharisees are really getting upset about all this. And they said, are you the Christ? Whose son is he? He's supposed to be the son of David, line 41, 42. And then we quote Psalm 110. Sit on my right hand and I will make your enemies a footstool beneath your feet. This is very important in books like Hebrews. If David then called the Lord, how is he the son? So questions about David, sonship, and so on and so forth, Psalms, questions about different aspects of that sort of thing. Chapter 23. There is, by the way, I told you, a proof text called the Testimonium in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are a catalog of the promises to the seed of David, in which God says to David in one of the proof texts, you are my son. And I don't have that text in front of me, but look in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Testimonium, and you'll see that text, the promises to the seed of David. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are very Davidically and messianically oriented, despite what some people think. Chapter 23, and Matthew is always more detailed here. The scribes and the Pharisees come and want them to do works and so on, and Jesus objects. The doing the works righteousness, they put heavy burdens on you, you see. Then they have phylacteries, and this is how Jews would have been perceived not only in Rome, but also in Poland during the Holocaust. And the borders of the garments, and they love the chief place at feasts. So all these people are just big fakes who just want to sit in front of in the feast and show off their phylacteries and their prayer shawls. But you should not be called rabbi, for one of you is a teacher and all of you are brothers. So you shouldn't call rabbi means my master. I have to look in the Greek if it's rabbi there. I think anyway, again, attack on calling people teachers. Line 13, Pharisees, hypocrites. Here's the hypocrite material again. The blind guides, the hypocrites. 23 again. Woe, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. So this is a big woe section. Only in Matthew, not parallel in the other. But this is all very interesting, this whole section. But it picks up from the Pharisees as blind guides earlier. And there it is, line 16. Woe unto you, blind guides. Remember the blind guides? Every plant which my Father has not planted shall be uprooted. And the blind leading the blind, and the Pharisees are the blind guides. I don't have to go back to that, but you'll find it earlier in the Matthew material on the toilet bowl material. So this is really a huge attack on Pharisees as blind guides. And I've told you that section in the Damascus document would said, and he caused the root of planting to grow, to inherit the good things of the earth, and they were as blind men searching for the way, and he raised up for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. So there is the guide language, the blind language connected to the raising, to planting a root of planting in a messianic manner at the beginning of the Damascus document. We should always refer back to that. Here, I guess the blind becomes the central theme here. By the way, the blind were barred from the temple, along with lepers and other people with physical blemishes and imperfections. It's not nice. I'm not saying they should have done that, but the Hellenizing materials here make a lot out of that, supporting the blind and the lepers and so on and so forth. Whether people in Rome really did support these people or not, I'm not at liberty to say. But the point was to embarrass the Jews over those strictures, because the point was that the blind couldn't see in order not to fall into impurity. So if you let them into the temple, they might in some manner impinge upon the purity of the temple. I'm not for this kind of thing, but I'm just telling you that was what the ideology was, good or bad. And the same thing in the war scroll from Qumran: no blind, lame person with a sexual emission, etc., was to join the holy camps, because the holy camps were to be totally pure. Why were the holy camps in the wilderness? I know it's crazy, but that's what they thought. Why were the holy camps in the wilderness to be perfectly pure? Because the holy angels were going to join them in the camps. Well, that's totally crazy, I admit, but that's what they thought. Why were the holy angels going to join them in their camps? Because the holy angels were going to carry on the final apocalyptic war against all evil with the holy pure people in the camps together to eradicate all evil from the earth. I know it's nuts, like Bin Laden or something, but it did inspire a lot of things in Islam, this literature. But that's what we're dealing with in terms of Palestinian zeal and extremism. Okay, so arguing against the blind cuts two ways. One, it's the usage at the beginning of the Damascus document. Two, it has to do with who were barred from the temple. And so now Jesus, and then the hypocrite language. The hypocrite language has to do with Galatians 2, where Paul calls Peter and Barnabas hypocrites. And of course, Pharisees, I told you here, is often a code name for the James party in early Christianity, insisting on the law and temple and purity regulations. And so Jesus says, blind Pharisee, cleanse first the inside of the cup of the platter, that the outside may become clean too. Oh, these are favorite sayings. You are like whitened sepulchres, and so on and so forth. Pharisees, hypocrites, ye build the sepulchres of the prophets and garnish the tombs of the righteous. That's true. The righteous were looked upon very highly. And so on. But you partook of the blood of the righteous. You are the sons of them that slew the prophets. There we go. The first accusation of slaying all the prophets. It's haunted the Jews everywhere throughout history. It pervades the Koran. Where's the first incidence of it? As I think I have mentioned, Thessalonians 2:15, where Paul says, and now you are, the Jews are persecuting you, my churches, the Jews who killed the Lord Messiah or something like that, and killed all the prophets too, and who are the enemies of the whole human race. Just read. That, I think, is the wellspring of the slaying all the prophets, because, you know, who did the Jews kill who were prophets? And I've said it over and over and over again. It's amazing how few they didn't kill. We've done it over and over. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Nathan, none of them killed. Elijah, Elisha, Eli, Samuel, none of them killed. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Micah, Hosea. Where's the killing of all of the prophets? You see, that's the shameful thing. That actually the Jews hardly killed any prophets at all. Maybe there's some legend about Zechariah, who was supposedly killed between sanctuary and temple, and he speaks about Abel the righteous being killed by Cain. O Jerusalem, which killeth the prophets and stone those sent to her. Behold, your house is left desolate unto you, again after the fall. This is very harsh stuff. We all love it. But again, you have to evaluate it. What prophets did the Jews kill? I want to know what prophets the Jews killed, beside these little sort of almost unknowns. And Abel, Cain, Abel, going to blame Cain and Abel on the Jewish people? Are we going to blame Cain and Abel on the Jewish people? It doesn't have to do with all mankind. What's that got to do with the Jewish people? Zechariah, the son of Barachias, I don't know the whole issue in that particular event, but not surprising that some anti-establishment people get into trouble occasionally. But what is surprising is how few prophets were killed. Okay, so now we have here put your finger in the dike here, just one moment. Let me find a convenient place to stop and let you go. I'm sorry to be, I think finally here, we get into the little apocalypse in Matthew 24:1. Notice how it begins in both Matthew 24:1, Mark chapter 13. Bring me back to this next time, because we will move along and through it, and we will now get to the things we want to get to. Jesus went out from the temple. He was leaving the temple, and with his disciples, and he looked back at the buildings, and he answered, see all these things, verily I say unto you, and he repeats, verily there shall not be left one stone upon another, and all will be thrown down. Mark 13:2. See these things, there shall not left here one stone upon the other, and all will be thrown down. Luke 21:6. There shall not be left one stone upon the other, and all will be thrown down. Okay, again, this triggers the next material, which is the little apocalypses. But it seems to me either you accept that as a legitimate prophecy, or it's written after the fall of the temple. Now, we had earlier, I forget the passage that we had it earlier, where we quoted it earlier. We just came to it. But I say one last thing I have in my book. In the Balta Rabbi Natan, the Talmudic material, which often incorporates a lot of Second Temple material, after the temple is destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan is leaving Jerusalem riding on a donkey with two of his disciples, Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, I think. And he stops and looks back, and he sees the temple in flames. And he starts pronouncing the woes. He says something about woe and so on and so forth. To my mind, those two episodes are totally related. Rabbi Yochanan, the founder of Rabbinic Judaism after the fall of the temple, who goes and applies the messianic prophecy to Vespasian according to the Talmud, and Jesus leaving the temple. Both look back, both see the temple in ruins. You say, what's that got to do with it? Well, I think a lot. Anyway, I'll pick up there next time, but we will go into the little apocalypse. Get me into the widow's mites first. Start me with the widow's mites, and we'll go on from there. Thanks for your patience. Sorry to be such a difficult person. I know this is unpleasant. It's unpleasant for me too, so I rarely teach this course. You're the judge, you decide.